What up? What up? Welcome to the Uncut Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Z. And holy shizzle, I have got a great episode for you. On this episode, I sit down with Serena Mastin. She's a successful entrepreneur, a speaker, and she just wrote an incredible memoir titled Expose. You Can't Heal When You Hide. Serena has experienced significant trauma in her life, and this podcast just scratches the surface. Her biological father was the head of a satanic cult. He sexually abused Serena and took her virginity by the age of 5. By the age of 7, she had been out of several foster homes. At the age of 15, she started living on the streets where she struggled with meth addiction and an eating disorder. However, she still worked 3 jobs and attended school with the goal of graduating. Like I said, we barely scratched the surface of Serena's life in this podcast. She is an absolute rock star, and I hope you enjoy this episode. And now, let's get into the show.
Welcome to Recovery Rockstars Uncut, uniting the recovery community with raw and real stories. Your host, Kevin Z, puts the light on people and brands that are rocking the recovery lifestyle. So you want to be a rock superstar? RecoveryRockstars.com. Now, here's Kevin.
You're always like driving from here to there. It's just really chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
You have little kids. And so when they become like a little bit older, you're kind of like, no thanks, guys.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to a birthday party ever again.
Too many, way too many growing up. Well, Serena, we're here now. We're on the Uncut Podcast. And I am so excited to speak to you today because you've got quite an incredible story. First of all, you've got the best smile. How many compliments do you get on your smile a day? You've got the biggest, brightest smile. You get that compliment a lot?
I get a few compliments on my smile, but it's mostly because they're like, wow, that's a big one.
That is a big smile. No, it's a very genuine smile. I like it.
I think it's because I have a tendency to smile with my whole face.
Yeah.
Is why.
Yeah. Well, you look happy. You just look happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when you endure so much, you look at your life and you are so grateful. So like even in the rough times, I always find gratitude because it's nothing compared to what I've been through. So I think that's a lot of where you see that vibrancy.
Yeah. And on this podcast, I always like to start off on a very positive note. So what is the best thing that has happened to you this week?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I always have a lot of like good nuggets and fun things. So let me think. That was just off the cuff, so I wasn't ready. Okay, I'm going to say that my daughter was accepted to play in a national tournament in Utah for rugby.
Oh.
So she's going to be flying out in a week or two, and she was able to raise enough money on her own from family and friends to be able to go, because there's no way I could have afforded something of that magnitude. So I'm really excited. That's a huge blessing.
That is so rugby.
Yeah, she's a tough one.
How did she get into rugby?
It was on accident. She went for the free cookies for, a sign-up sheet.
And then she signed up and now is traveling. That's amazing.
Yeah, she I think she was actually just born to be a rugby player. Like she's really like fierce and she loves, being athletic and working out. She's probably like, I would say 5'6", 5'7", and maybe 130 pounds, but
tough as nails.
Like 130 pounds of muscle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's tough as nails.
Love it. Love it.
Rugby, they don't wear any pads.
That's what I'm saying. She's a badass.
Yeah. No pads, nothing. And these girls have no rules. Like they can pull your hair, they can bite you. Like, what?
I don't know if biting is allowed.
They do when they're in like their little scrum.
A scrum, yeah.
Bite an ear. I'm like, oh no. I mean, like when you're watching a game, girls are like transported out like by an ambulance. Like it's, yeah.
That's crazy. Well, we're going to focus on a little softer topic now. I was on your Instagram page and I love this quote that you said. You said, if there was one piece of advice I could give everyone, men and women alike, it's to change the voice inside your head, to speak love and strength to yourself.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm such a negative Nelly in my head.
I think it's that we continue to tell ourselves the same stories over and over again. And there was a point in my life where I was really good at forgiving everyone but myself.
Mm,
And I blamed myself for putting myself in positions that I shouldn't have been in, which is why some of the things happened that did. You see what I
mm,
mean? And so you have these blame and shame tape recorders that are basically in your head constantly rotating the same negative, content. And instead, if we spoke to ourselves in a loving way, almost if we envisioned ourselves as a child and spoke to ourselves as a little girl or a little boy, would we say those same things?
mm.
We wouldn't.
We wouldn't.
And
You
so,
know,
yeah.
it's interesting. There are so many days where I'm in my head just nonstop with the negative talk, and I just out of nowhere I'll push pause, and I'm like, "Why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you mentally torturing yourself? Why? Like, would you do that to your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother? No. Like, why are you doing it to yourself?
Well,
It's
and
crazy."
get so used to it
Uh-huh.
that we almost disregard it and assume it's normal, that it's okay
Very
because
good
we're
point.
stressed or we're overwhelmed or something really hurt us or triggered us and we feel at blame or something. And the challenge is not just being able to recognize it, because that's a huge step, is recognizing when those voices come,
Mm,
but it's also to identify and uncover where they're coming from. Is that, you know, a triggering moment or experience that I've had in the past that is now coming back because I'm stressed about something else? And
mm.
why is it telling me that I'm not good enough or I'm not a good mother? Or if I didn't do this way, then I'm embarrassed because of how I would be perceived,
Yeah.
right? It goes
Yeah.
back to uncovering the moments that actually created those thoughts in the first place.
Yeah. And you've had some moments.
I've had
You
moments.
yeah, you've recently wrote a book. By the way, how was it writing a book?
It was
What's it like being an
excruciating.
author?
It was excruciating.
I wish we're gonna
I
get into why, because you had to uncover and go deep within yourself.
Yes, I had no idea. Number one, I'm not a writer, so I had to
Mhm.
learn how to write. And I think the hardest part was I didn't recognize in the beginning, I thought, I'm just going to tell my story. Well, when you're writing a book, you have to show it. And so when you're showing your story versus telling it, it's almost like you have to close your eyes and remember all the little details about those moments
Mm.
and you relive the trauma. And
Yeah.
so every chapter was like reliving a different chapter of obstacles or pain or something that I'd experienced. Even excitement, though, which is good.
Mhm.
And your body keeps score of those things. So your body like holds memories in certain areas. Like when we get nervous, our stomach turns, like so your
Yeah.
body actually recognizes that. So there was one moment where I was writing about something that had a lot of adrenaline. And my Apple Watch goes off and basically says that my heart rate is increased and I need to start breathing.
Wow. Wow.
It's like your body is actually remembering the moment as if you were there. And so it was a really challenging process, but it was the most beautiful healing opportunity and exercise that I've ever experienced.
You sent me the first chapter,
Mm-hmm.
and I was on pins and needles. I think I was white knuckling my chair, like I'm holding on to my chair reading this. And I want to go kind of back to the beginning because, you would share the experience with you had a single mom
Mm-hmm.
who lost her father when
Yeah.
she was 16. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then from there, she had several abusive relationships. Um, but I know the story really starts off with Vince. Can you tell us a little bit about Vince and that
So,
experience?
yeah. So Vince is my biological father, not my sister's. My sister is 5 years older than me.
Okay.
So she was five when they got together, and then I was born. He was the leader of a satanic cult. And through that cult, practiced obviously witchcraft, satanic rituals, things as disturbing as bestiality. And in addition to all that, he sexually abused my sister and I. And he took my virginity before the age of 5.
Unbelievable. And you recount the experience and several things in detail that happened. How did your mom get away from Vince?
So I think the hardest part is that she was brainwashed a lot of the time and gaslit and
Mm,
manipulated. And so not only was there all of that, like emotional damage that she was trying to decipher through, but additional cult members would come in. They would stand outside the window. They would follow us wherever we went. There were tape recorders all throughout the house. Every phone call was recorded. So she felt trapped on top of the gaslighting, the manipulation, and the brainwashing. And so the way that she was able to get out is one of the other cult members really cared about her and was able to get us out on her watch, on
mm,
his watch. And so in that process, it was a whirlwind. I didn't understand what was happening at the time because remember when you grow up in an environment that has certain rituals and things that are not normal, you don't know that it's not normal. That's
mm,
the only experience you've ever had. And by this point, I wasn't even in, school because I was under the age of 5. So I didn't experience other, relationships, or I didn't have anyone to connect with that I would have thought this was bad. So it was like a tornado effect. It was just
mm.
a whirlwind of things happening. The night before we got out, I remember going into the kitchen and Vince had a cauldron. And I know that sounds so surreal. It's like, who has a cauldron in general? But it was like I walked in and I looked up and I just saw this big black pot and there was smoke coming out of it. He's stirring it. And I didn't know at the time, but he was, basically preparing to sacrifice my sister and I both to the cult, which is typically a sexual sacrifice. And if we didn't get out when we did, my story could have been a completely different version.
First of all, I can't even fathom being 5 years old, losing your virginity, and then experiencing anything that you experienced. Talk to me about what happened after you guys got out, because this was a lifestyle that you said you were used to. You didn't know anything else. So when you got into the real world, how was that transition?
Because of many factors, my mother did lose her rights, to care for us, and
Mm,
she had to earn her rights back as a parent. And so we were immediately taken and put in, my sister and I, into witness protection and several different foster homes. I still was so young and none of this made sense to me. I just wanted my mom. I
mm,
didn't understand. I knew that Vince was bad, but I was too young to really articulate even some of the things that went on. So we went through multiple court hearings and it almost felt like interrogations from counselors and psychologists. And
mm.
it was a lot. And I remember that my sister was so mad at me because she was 10, I was 5, because I could not remember. I had literally blocked out some of the memories because they were so traumatic. However, as a small child, I was reenacting those things to other adults.
Mm,
And so it almost became like I was unmanageable. And because we were in the witness protection program, we were constantly moved in the middle of the night to different locations. And the foster homes were like a different universe to me. It was a different planet. Like I was on an adventure, but then it was also a very terrifying adventure
right.
because you never know when you're going to wake up and that station wagon was going to be there waiting for you, or where you were going to go next. At times, one of the foster homes that I was in, she she had like a hallway, and down the passageway was a room and a bathroom, but she had an accordion door that she would latch shut and only allow, the kids, she had 3 kids at the time in different areas, would only allow us to come out for meals and then 1 hour a day. And then she'd lock me back in this corridor where my room and my bathroom were. And one night she forgot to latch the accordion door. And at this point, I was 6 years old and I was determined to escape. And so I had, one of those crinkly Stater Brothers bags was all I had with my naked Barbie dolls. And I had a unicorn sweater and my ripped jeans. And I tiptoed out and I ran away for the first time when I was 6.
Oh my gosh.
So I was just like, get me out. I'm going to go find my mom. Like I was determined. That didn't end that way. I got about
no idea
3
where you are.
down.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I got about 3 houses down, and it's really noticeable, at midnight when you see a little blonde 6-year-old trying to walk down the street with a Stater Brothers bag.
Yeah. Wow. So how many foster homes were you in and out of?
So I was in approximately 9 different foster homes. When they didn't have a location for me, they would actually, and many times split from my sister. So because there wasn't room for both of us in one location. And then other times I would be in juvenile hall because that was the only location that had an open bed during the transition or waiting for another home to open. Yeah, so it was, and then from there, we finally moved in with a family member, which was an aunt and an uncle of mine. And
how old were you?
By this point, I think I was 7 or 8. I think I was 7. And my uncle was dying of cancer. So he was in and out of the hospital and then ended up in hospice. And my aunt was already had 2 teenagers plus my sister and now me. And I was just so unruly. She just could not manage my behavior. And so many of the punishments were very cruel and unusual. So when I say that, I give an example of, there was one night where I don't even remember what I had done, but I'd done something prior that day. I was sleeping in the top bunk in my bed, and she grabbed me by the hair and pulled me off of the top bunk down to the floor to then drag me into, the main room to then scold me for what I had done, and then had me stand in the corner with my nose in the corner so long that I actually fell asleep standing up. And I don't remember the rest of the night. There was, and that was more of a unique situation, but I think the one that hurt me the most, the one that humiliated me the most was by this point, I was 8 or 9. So I was a little bit older. And she had me take a shower in the middle of the day. So I ran in there, I turned the shower on, and I just had the bright idea that I wanted to do mouthwash commercials in the mirror. And so I, snuck in the cupboard, got the mouthwash out. I took my shirt off and I had my shirt kind of stuck to my forehead, because it kind of draped down. And I had my panties still around my ankle, but I was just dancing in the mirror doing little mouthwash commercial. Well, I did not realize I drank the entire bottle of mouthwash. 2, the door swung open because I guess I had been taking much longer than I normally had to take a shower, and I hadn't even gotten in yet. So the moment the door swung open, I hid the mouthwash behind my back. And the first thing that she said is, what are you doing? And I answered with nothing, which was also a lie because I'm standing right in front of this giant mirror with my shirt on my head and my panties around my ankles.
And really good
mouthwash
breath
behind my back.
Yeah.
And her punishment for that was she placed me in front of the bay window that faced the main street, a full-size window, almost the size of the length of the wall, with my shirt on my head and my panties around my ankles. And it just happened to be a day where my cousins, who were teenagers, were moving things in and out of the house with their friends. And all I remember was feeling so humiliated that I had to stand there naked in front of the bay window for what I did.
What the actual fuck?
It was like,
And this
I
is 9 years
still,
old, 8 or 9 years old?
yeah, I still to this day can't understand the thought process of that, but I do understand this. I had so much trauma as a child that I did things that were so unusual. And if you didn't understand how to deal with a child with trauma, you could easily get impatient and frustrated and not know what to do. And so I'm not condoning anything that she did. I do understand that she was dealing with her husband in the hospital,
Mhm.
two teenagers, and my sister and I. My sister withdrew. So she kind of repressed a lot of her feelings and emotions, and she was the perfect child. Whereas I acted out.
Mhm.
So I became the center of a lot of that abuse.
So this is age 9. Take me through the teenage years.
So by the time I did get to move back in with my mom married someone new when I was 12 who they've been married 31 years now.
Mm.
So he is the only father that I've ever known. However, after being through so many years where you are completely independent and determined and rebellious in so many ways, by the time it was my 15th birthday, and my mom had said, "You cannot leave. Like, we're going to do something for you." And I said, "No, I want to see my friends." And I demanded that I see my friends, and I said, "I'm leaving." And she said, "If you leave, don't come back." And she did that because she knew that part of that was I was so determined and so independent at that point and so rebellious because of the things I hadn't dealt with that she knew I had to face things head on
Mm.
in order to recognize that I need to look within. But when you're a teenager, you don't think that way. You think, I'm going and I'm not coming back. And so I lived on the streets at 16 years old. I enrolled myself into high school to finish my final year of high school. I graduated when I was 17. I had 3 jobs. So I took the bus to each job. And sometimes I slept in abandoned houses. Sometimes I slept on a park bench, in a shed, with drug dealers in hotel rooms. And at this point, I had and struggled with an addiction with an eating disorder and an addiction with meth. So that was my source of survival. Number one, because I couldn't afford to eat. And number two, there's a part of me that clung on to that because I needed to finish school. I had 3 jobs. I had homework. I needed to survive. And so the part of going to sleep was not a safe option when you're living on the streets. I was raped by a 40-year-old man at 16, and then I was raped again by a 19-year-old man. And so there's this fear, plus you find comfort in the people associated with your drug use because it's almost like, even though they have underlying intentions, you felt like that was kind of like your group, they would protect you. Although it uncovered later that it was just more damaging, of course, but in that time, that's all that I saw.
Did you try when you were living on the streets to go home at all? Did your mom try to find you or your sister try to find you? Or you were just so hell-bent on being independent? I mean, you had a certain mindset that you wanted to be on the streets. Obviously, you.
I wanted to prove everyone wrong,
Hmm.
that I was not going to be a statistic, that I was going to graduate, that I didn't need anyone, and I could do it on my own. And although that mindset is very unhealthy, um, it definitely helped me survive.
Yeah.
However, by the time right before I graduated, I think it was probably a 2 week period where I had a lack of sleep and nutrition. Um, and I collapsed at work.
Hmm.
And I was still conscious, but I was just a little delusional. And
Yeah.
exhausted. And I just said, please call my mom. And my mom came and she picked me up and she nurtured me back to health
Mm.
and loved me despite of all of the pain that I had caused. I mean, she had to earn her rights back as a parent and fought for several years just to get us back, turned her whole life around, just a whole different person, tried to create this amazing environment for us. And I was just rebellious. And still, when she came to me, there was no blame, no shame, just unconditional love and acceptance until I was healthy again.
Mm.
And then she, helped me get back on my feet, finish the last few credits I had in high school, and then kind of directed me on the path for my career.
When you moved back in with her, were you still in active addiction with your eating disorder and meth?
So the
Did you
eating
get,
disorder went off and on until I was about 29 years old.
okay.
So it started at about 14, 15, and I was finally able to overcome it when in my late 20s.
Mm.
The meth addiction, the day that she picked me up was the day I stopped.
Wow.
And the challenge that I learned though over time is that once you have that pattern, you're always addicted to something. And so I just replaced that addiction with something else. And then another time I would replace it with something else. And so I learned that I had to be aware of that addictive side of myself, whether I was replacing it by becoming a workaholic and not taking care of my body, or if it was, alcohol. You can easily latch on to something else. I did not go through a recovery program. I just
Mm.
put it down and didn't pick it up again.
Mm.
So I had to self teach my, some of those principles that I never learned when I stepped away from it, because then I just started pushing my addiction onto different things.
So this is only taking us through your high school graduation. You
Yeah,
remember
I'm
when I told
42
you
now,
like
so we
how
have to
I'm like
left.
leaning forward, I'm like sweating, Your
I'm like, we
story.
have quite the story. I'm 42, so we got.
Well, I don't want to give too much away because obviously, we want people to purchase your book. There's a lot more trauma that unfolds.
Yes.
But one thing that just still blows my mind is where you're at today. Because I want to talk about yourself as a agency owner, you're an author, you're an entrepreneur, you're a speaker as well. With all this trauma, I want you, for somebody who's struggling with whatever addiction, whatever trauma, to get to the point that you're at, what is your biggest piece of advice to give somebody hope?
To put in perspective, trauma paired with anxiety, depression, and other disorders, paired with an addiction, is a very complicated mess.
Mm.
And so the first thing that you need to do in seeking like some sort of support is to step out of hiding, step out of the darkness,
Mm.
because we hide all of those things, and have the courage to share your truth with someone that you can trust, that will support you through your journey. Because if you keep hiding and suppressing and pretending, that is going to continue to just weigh on your body and your mind. And that would act as part of the process that deteriorates you. So the first
Mm.
step is finding someone to support you. The second step is really self-awareness, starting to understand where some of these triggers came from, not blaming the past, but acknowledging it.
Mm.
And then understanding that it's part of the process. In order for you to overcome it, is that you have to face it. So you have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations to face your truth. So those are two big steps in the right direction to overcoming some of these things.
Which, with the name of your book, Exposed, you can't heal when you hide.
Yes.
Yes. How long did it take you to come up with that name? It's a perfect name, by the way.
So what's interesting is I came up with the "you can't heal when you hide" about 3 years ago, because I kept hiding. And I knew that if I kept hiding, I would never heal. And that's where that statement came from. I came up with the exposed part of it once I recognized at the end of the book that I have literally just exposed every dark detail of my life. And my biggest fear is being exposed. So the fact that when you expose yourself, you take the power away from anyone else creating their story about you. And so there's power in that word, but there's also a little bit of fear.
Yeah. When you wrote the book and you started to promote it, I'm sure there's a lot of fear. What kind of feedback are you getting?
You know, I'm getting a lot of positive feedback. I think there's that part of me that's waiting for the bad feedback. I did change many of the names in the book to protect people's privacy, but there are people that hurt me that I needed for myself to be completely raw, honest, explicit, and vulnerable and share some of those details. And so I changed their names, but those people know who they are. And so there is a part of me that is a little bit afraid of that. But if I couldn't find the courage to share my story, then how could I ask others to do the same? I couldn't.
Love it. So Exposed, You Can't Heal When You Hide. Where can somebody buy this book?
So they can go directly to my website at serenamastin.com and they'll get a signed copy. Or they could actually just put Serena Mastin into Amazon and the book will come up immediately.
So the last name is spelled Mastin.
Yes.
serenamastin.com.
Yeah.
Serena, I have no words. I mean, I really don't. You're an absolute rock star. To experience what you've gone through and experienced, like we talked about when I first met you, could have gone one of two ways.
Oh yeah, easily.
Yeah.
And there's moments when I thought it was.
Yeah.
I got here on the floor.
Yeah. You're here, you're an author, you're an entrepreneur, you're thriving, and you're sharing your story, which is going to provide hope for others. And
yes.
I can't tell you, just how unbelievable I think you are. You're a true rock star.
Thank you. I'm just honored to be a part of this. My goal is really just to help others heal because I felt like I had to search for those tools. And if I can kind of be a guide or a support to anyone, that's really my purpose.
I love it. You guys, serenamastin.com. Her book, Expose, You Can't Heal When You Hide. Go buy it. Serena.
Just be aware. It's not for sensitive readers.
I will, yes. You'll find that out chapter 1. Again, I was white knuckling my chair reading this. But you know what? You got through it. You write about it. You're exposing yourself. And again, you're delivering the message of hope. So I applaud you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being in recovery, rock stars. I guess today's episode is done. In all seriousness, though, Kevin appreciates you being part of this community. RecoveryRockstars.com. Want to email us? Kevin@RecoveryRockstars.com. Facebook, Recovery Rockstars. Instagram us @RecoveryRockstars. Kevin's wardrobe brought to you by Kevin. Kevin's transportation brought to you by Kevin. Kevin's cable bill paid by Kevin so he can keep this podcast going. Goodbye.